Asiatic War, 83-82 BC. 172. Rome for its part seemed equally eager for war and the spoils and prestige that it might bring. 173. After his invasion of Bithynia in 73, Eleucalus was assigned against Mithridates and his Armenian ally Tigranes the Great in Asia Minor. 174. Fighting a war of maneuver against Mithridates' supply lines, Eleucalus was able to force Mithridates from an attempted siege of Cyzicus and pursue him into Pontus and thence into Armenia. 175. After defeat forced the Romans from large parts of Armenia and Pontus in 67, Eleucalus was replaced in command by Pompey. 176. Pompey, who had recently secured and completed an extraordinary command to rid the Mediterranean of pirates, 177, moved against Mithridates in 66. 178, defeating him in battle and securing the submission of Tigranes. 179, Mithridates fled to Crimea where he was betrayed and killed by his son Pharnaces in 63. 180, Pompey remained in the east to pacify and settle Roman conquests in the region, also extending Roman control south to Judea. 181, end of the Republic. First Triumvirate. A Roman marble head of Pompey, photographed in Thenwy Carlsberg Glyptotek. Pompey returned from the Third Mithridatic War at the end of 62 BC. In the interim, before his arrival back in Italy, the Senate had successfully suppressed a conspiracy and insurrection led by a senator, Lucius Sergius Catilina, to overthrow that year's consuls. 182, in the aftermath of the conspiracy, which was abetted by popular discontent, the Senate moved legislation to temper unrest in Italy, expanding the grain dole and implementing other much-needed reforms. 183, Pompey, landing in Brundisium, publicly dismissed his troops, indicating that he had no desire to follow Sulla's example and dominate the Republic by force, as some conservative senators had feared. 184, he celebrated a splendid triumph and then attempted to have his eastern settlements passed by the Senate. Ratification, even with the backing of his friendly consul, was not forthcoming due to the opposition of Eleucalus, Crassus, and Cato the Younger. 185, settlement of Pompey's veterans on lands was also received coolly and delayed. 186, after the election of Julius Caesar as one of the consuls of 59 BC, Pompey and Caesar, along with Crassus, engaged in a political alliance, misleadingly dubbed the First Triumvirate. 187, the alliance proved to the great benefit of the three men. Caesar passed legislation to distribute state lands as poor relief while also providing land for Pompey's veterans. He also had Pompey's eastern settlements ratified, for Crassus, has secured relief for tax farmers and a place on agrarian commission. 188, Caesar won, for himself, the political support needed to acquire a profitable provincial command in Gaul and secure his political future. 189, attempting first to pass portions of his program through the Senate, Caesar found the Curia obstinate. He thus unveiled his alliance with Pompey and Crassus and moved his legislation before the people instead. 190, political opposition to the allies was immense. Caesar's co-consul in 59 BC, Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, along with Cato and other supporters, attempted to obstruct enactment of Caesar's legislation, forcing the allies to use intimidation and force. The obstructive tactics, producing popular indignation against Caesar and his allies, were successful and greatly weakened their popular support. 191, Caesar also facilitated the election of the former patrician Publius Claudius Pulcher to the tribunate 458. Claudius set about depriving Caesar's senatorial enemies of two of their more obstinate leaders in Cato and Cicero. Claudius was a bitter opponent of Cicero because Cicero had testified against him in a sacrilege case. Claudius attempted to try Cicero for executing citizens without a trial during the Catiline conspiracy, resulting in Cicero going into self-imposed exile and his house in Rome being burnt down. Claudius also passed a bill that forced Cato to lead the invasion of Cyprus, which would keep him away from Rome for some years. Claudius also passed a law to expand the previous partial grain subsidy to a fully free grain dole for citizens. 192. Map of the Gallic Wars during his term as praetor in the Iberian Peninsula, modern Portugal and Spain. Pompey's contemporary Julius Caesar defeated two local tribes in battle. 193. After his term as consul in 59. He was appointed to a 5-year term as the proconsular governor of Cisalpine Gaul, part of current northern Italy, Transalpine Gaul, current southern France, and Illyria, part of the modern Balkans. 193, 194. Not content with an idle governorship, Caesar strove to find reason to invade Gaul, modern France and Belgium, which would give him the dramatic military success Hussat. When two local tribes began to migrate on a route that would take them near, not into, the Roman province of Transalpine Gaul, Caesar had the barely sufficient excuse he needed for his Gallic wars, fought between 58 and 49. Caesar defeated large armies at major battles 58 and 57. In 55 and 54 he made two expeditions into Britain, the first Roman to do so. Caesar then defeated a union of Gauls at the Battle of Eleza, 195, completing the Roman conquest of Transalpine Gaul. By 50, all of Gaul lay in Roman hands. Claudius formed armed gangs that terrorized the city and eventually began to attack Pompey's followers, who in response funded counter-gangs formed by Titus Annius Milo. The political alliance of the triumvirate was crumbling. Domitius Ahenobarbus ran for the consulship in 55, promising to take Caesar's command from him. Eventually, the triumvirate was renewed at Lucca. Pompey and Crassus were re-promised the consulship in 55, and Caesar's term as governor was extended for 5 years. Beginning in Thespium of 54, a wave of political corruption and violence swept Rome. 196. This chaos reached a climax in January of 52 BC, when Claudius was murdered in a gang war by Milo. In 53, Crassus launched a Roman invasion of the Parthian Empire, modern Iraq and Iran. After initial successes, 197, he marched his army deep into the desert, winking at Smiley. 198, but here his army was cut off deep in enemy territory, surrounded and slaughtered at the Battle of Carrhae, in which Crassus himself perished. The death of Crassus removed some of the balance in the triumvirate and, consequently, Caesar and Pompey began to move apart. While Caesar was fighting in Gaul, Pompey proceeded with a legislative agenda for Rome that revealed that he was at best ambivalent towards Caesar, 199, and perhaps now covertly allied with Caesar's political enemies. Pompey's wife, Julia, who was Caesar's daughter, died in childbirth. This event severed the last remaining bond between Pompey and Caesar. In 51, some Roman senators demanded that Caesar not be permitted to stand for consul unless he turned over control of his armies to the state, which would have left Caesar defenseless before his enemies. Caesar chose civil war over laying down his command and facing trial. Caesar's civil war and dictatorship. On the 1st of January, 1949, an agent of Caesar presented an ultimatum to the Senate. The ultimatum was rejected, and the Senate then passed a resolution which declared that if Caesar did not lay down his arms by July of that year, he would be considered an enemy of the Republic. 200. Meanwhile, the senators adopted Pompey as the new champion against Caesar. On the 7th of January of 49, the Senate passed a Senatus Consultum Ultimum which vested Pompey with dictatorial powers. Pompey's army, however, was composed largely of untested conscripts. On the 10th of January, Caesar with his veteran army crossed the river Rubicon, the legal boundary of Roman Italy beyond which no commander might bring his army, in violation of Roman laws, and by the spring of 49 swept down the Italian peninsula towards Rome. Caesar's rapid advance forced Pompey, the consuls and the Tusculum portrait, a Roman sculpture of Julius Caesar, Archaeological Museum of Turin, Italy. The Curia Julia, the Senate house started by Julius Caesar in 44 BC and completed by Octavian in 29 BC, replacing the Curia Cornelia as meeting place of the Senate. The Senate to abandon Rome for Greece. Caesar entered the city unopposed. Afterwards Caesar turned his attention to the Pompeian stronghold of Hispania, modern Spain, 201, but decided to tackle Pompey himself in Greece. 202. Pompey initially defeated Caesar but failed to follow up on the victory, and was decisively defeated at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48, 203, despite outnumbering Caesar's forces 2-1, albeit with inferior quality troops. 204. Pompey fled again, this time to Egypt, where he was murdered. Pompey's death did not end the civil war, as Caesar's many enemies fought on. In 46 Caesar lost perhaps as much as a third of his army but ultimately came back to defeat the Pompeian army of Metellus Scipio in the Battle of Thapsus, after which the Pompeians retreated yet again to Hispania. Caesar then defeated the combined Pompeian forces at the Battle of Munda. With Pompey defeated and order restored, Caesar wanted to achieve undisputed control over the government. The powers which he gave himself were later assumed by his imperial successors. 205. His assumption of these powers decreased the authority of Rome's other political institutions. Caesar held both the dictatorship and the tribunate, and alternated between the consulship and the proconsulship. 205. In 48, Caesar was given permanent tribunician powers. This made his person sacrosanct, gave him the power to veto the Senate, and allowed him to dominate the plebeian council. In 46, Caesar was given censorial powers, 206, which he used to fill the Senate with his own partisans. Caesar then raised the membership of the Senate to 900. 207. This robbed the senatorial aristocracy of its prestige, and made it increasingly subservient to him. While the assemblies continued to meet, he submitted all candidates to them for election as well as all bills for enactment. Thus, the group became powerless and were unable to oppose him. 208. Caesar's assassination. Caesar began to prepare for a war against the Parthian Empire. Since his absence from Rome would limit his ability to install his own consuls, he passed a law that allowed him to appoint all magistrates, and later all consuls and tribunes. This transformed the magistrates from representatives of the people to representatives of dictator. 207. Caesar was now the primary figure of the Roman state, enforcing and entrenching his powers. His enemies feared that he had ambitions to become an autocratic ruler. Arguing that the Roman Republic was in danger, a group of senators led by Gaius Cassius and Marcus Brutus hatched a conspiracy and assassinated Caesar at a meeting of the Senate on 15 March 44. 209. Most of the conspirators were senators, who had a variety of economic, political, or personal motivations for carrying out the assassination. Many were afraid that Caesar would soon resurrect the monarchy and declare himself king. Others feared loss of property or prestige as Caesar carried out his land reforms in favor of the landless classes. Virtually all the conspirators fled the city after Caesar's death in fear of retaliation. Second Triumvirate. This mid-1st century BC Roman wall painting in Pompeii is probably a depiction of Cleopatra VII as Venus Genetrix, with her son Caesarion as Cupid. Its owner Marcus Fabius Rufus most likely ordered its concealment behind a wall in reaction to the execution of Caesarion on orders of Octavian in 30 BC. 210, 211. The civil wars that followed destroyed what was left of the Republic. 212. After the assassination, Caesar's three most important associates, Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, Caesar's co-consul, Gaius Octavianus, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and great-nephew, and Marcus Lepidus, Caesar's magister equitum, formed an alliance known as the Second Triumvirate. 213. They held powers that were nearly identical to the powers that Caesar had held under his constitution. As such, the Senate and assemblies remained powerless, even after Caesar had been assassinated. The conspirators were then defeated at the Battle of Philippi in 42. Although Brutus defeated Octavian, Antony defeated Cassius, who committed suicide. Brutus did likewise soon afterwards. Following Philippi, Rome's territories were divided between the triumvirs, but the agreement was fragile and could not withstand internal jealousies and ambitions. Antony detested Octavian and spent most of his time in the east, while Lepidus favored Antony but felt himself obscured by both his colleagues. Following the defeat of Sextus Pomptus, a dispute between Lepidus and Octavian regarding the allocation of lands broke out. Octavian accused Lepidus of usurping power in Sicily and of attempted rebellion, and in 36 BC, Lepidus was forced into exile in Circete and stripped of all his offices except that of Pontifex Maximus. His former provinces were awarded to Octavian. Antony, meanwhile, married Caesar's lover, Cleopatra of Ptolemaic Egypt, intending to use the fabulously wealthy Egypt as a base to dominate Rome. The ambitious Octavian built a power base of patronage and then launched a campaign against Antony. 209. Another civil war subsequently broke out between Octavian on one hand and Antony and Cleopatra on the other. This final civil war culminated in the latter's defeat at Actium in 31 BC. Octavian's forces would then chase Antony and Cleopatra to Alexandria, where they would both commit suicide in 30 BC. Octavian was granted a series of special powers including sole imperium within the city of Rome, permanent consular powers, and credit for every Roman military victory, since all future generals were assumed to be acting under his command. In 27 Octavian was granted the use of the names Augustus, indicating his primary status above all other Romans, princeps, which he used to refer to himself as in public, and he adopted the title Imperator Caesar, making him the first Roman emperor. 214. Constitutional system. The constitutional history of the Roman Republic began with the revolution which overthrew the monarchy in 509 BC, and ended with constitutional reforms that transformed the Republic into what will effectively be the Roman Empire, in 27 BC. The constitution of the Roman Republic was a constantly evolving, unwritten set of guidelines and principles passed down mainly through precedent, by which the government and its politics operated. 215. Senate. The Senate's ultimate authority derived from the esteem and prestige of the senators. 216. This esteem and prestige was based on both precedent and custom, as well as the caliber and reputation of the senators. The Senate passed decrees, which were called Senatus Consulta. These were officially advice from the Senatito, a magistrate. In practice, however, they were usually followed by the magistrates. 217. The focus of the Roman Senate was usually directed towards foreign policy. Though it technically had no official role in the management of military conflict, the Senate ultimately was the force that oversaw such affairs. This was due to the Senate's explicit power over the state's budget and in military affairs. 218.